All right, we're live. Okay, I see some people filing in from the waiting room. Thank you everybody for joining. Jasper, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Darren. I appreciate you inviting us to do this webinar. I'm excited to dive into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know catching up with you guys a while ago to kind of talk about the content that you have. I'm pretty excited. I think it's going to be I think it's going to be very relevant. It's also not something I hear a lot of people talk about, so super excited to have you on. Yeah, where are you calling in from, by the way, just so everyone has some bearings?
Yeah, I'm actually living in the south of Spain right now, right
Wow.
on the beach, so can't
Oh, no
complain.
kidding. Oh man,
Yeah,
that's
it's
great.
nice. It's nice, 70 degrees, sunny every day. You get to watch the sunset from the beach here, so yeah, it's
Ah,
good
oh, that's
living.
amazing.
Nice wine, nice food.
Oh man, I hear yeah, there's good rock climbing out that way too. I've always wanted to visit. Uh, Cool. So we have attendees jumping in. So quick logistical item for people filing in. So this will be interactive. We're gonna have time for Q&A. So feel free to leave a question, and then we'll get to that towards the end of it. Drop as many questions as you want. We'll get to as many as we can. The content here is very educational, so I would recommend, take notes, pull out your notepad. We'll send the recording afterwards as well. So yeah, with that in mind, let's kick things off. So
Yeah,
welcome everybody. Thanks for
cool.
joining. My name's Darren. I'm with Top Key, and today we're going to dive into one of the most overlooked revenue levers in short-term rentals called pacing. So this is a concept that I think a lot of people don't quite really even know about or understand, but it's also one of the most impactful. Jasper here is really one of the experts on this, just on this topic in general. Most operators are still they're operating in reactive mode. This helps you get into preventative mode, into proactive mode. So you're really getting ahead of the demand, predicting it. Um, yeah, with that in mind, so we have Jasper here. He's the co-founder of FreeWild, and yeah, I'll turn it over to him. He's really the expert here. I'm excited to hear what you have to talk about. Jasper, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I appreciate the invite. Yeah, so today, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to present I have a presentation ready here, but the main goal is really for everyone who's on this webinar, who's watching the recording in the future, to have a real strategy that you can implement in your business that will actually increase your revenue. And it's going to be all about pacing. I don't know how familiar everybody is with these concepts here, but I'm going to go through it fairly quickly because just for time's sake. But we will have a Q&A at the end. So I recommend everybody just focus on the content that we'll go through. If you have any questions, maybe make a quick note or pass them to Darren. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll cover any questions you'll have. We're also recording this. I'll make the slides available to everybody as well. So if you're throughout the presentation, if something is not 100% clear yet, don't worry. We'll give you the content, and I'm also available for you guys like afterwards in the next couple of weeks. If you have any questions, you can email me and I'll answer all your questions as well. So with that said, let's dive into it. I'm going to open up my slides here. Can we see the screen? Good to go.
Looks
All
good.
right. Awesome. Well, let's dive into it. So today's topic is pacing. Sure, you've heard about pacing. A lot of people know what pacing, they have an idea what pacing is, but they're not really clear on how exactly to use it in their revenue management to improve their revenue. And so that's what I'm going to be teaching today is really our strategy of how you can apply this concept in your business to increase your revenue, right? That's what it's all about. So a little bit about me. I've started my first Airbnb in 2012, so about 13 years ago. Done a little bit of everything, but the last 3 years or so, I've been 100% focused on revenue management. We are currently managing over 2,000 listings, so this slide needs to be updated. But we've got 45 clients in all across the world where we manage revenue for our clients. We manage close to $80 million now yearly. And through our strategies, we're able to increase people's revenue by anywhere from like 10 to 40%. Okay, you might also know me as the host of the Get Paid for Your Pad podcast, which I've been doing for, I don't know, I think over 10 years now. So the reason that I started doing revenue management was really because our company, Free Wild, we started that a couple of years ago. And I was in charge of driving revenue. And so I went around the industry, asked all the experts, like, hey, what's the best revenue management strategy? No one was really able to give me a real answer. Maybe they didn't want to. But anyway, we had to develop our own strategy essentially, and we got really good results. You know, we were doubling RevPAR almost compared to similar units in our market, and so that made us think, hey, this strategy is working so well for us. Would this work for other people as well? And so we tested it out with some of our students. We've done a lot of courses in the past, so we have a lot of students that went through our courses, and we implemented these strategies on their portfolios. And what we learned is that it worked. You know, it didn't just work for our portfolio; it worked for other people's portfolios as well. And so we realized, hey, we got something here where we can really help people increase their revenue. And so we got very excited. We started a revenue management service, and that's where we are now. So what we've learned through working with the companies that we work with, but also from all the people that have applied for our services. We do revenue reports for people, which I'll share later in the presentation how you can get access to that. But we learned that pretty much 95% of operators are leaving significant money on the table. Once every while, we get an application from somebody, and we look at their pricing strategy, and we're basically like, "Wow, you're doing great. You know, just keep doing what you're doing. Don't change anything, and you know you're doing a great job." But that's the exception to the rule. Right, 95% of the operators that we engage with, they are leaving significant money on the table. Now, when it comes to revenue management, there's really three ways that you can manage it. And we need these days in our short-term rental business, we need somebody to focus on revenue management. It can't be something that you just do on the side as a co-founder. You really have to have somebody that's focused on it. So you got three options: do it yourself, learn it, and spend a couple of hours a day on it. You hire somebody in-house, or you partner with a company like us, right? Those are really the three options that you have. But it's really important that you choose one of these options, because the operators are leaving the most money on the table are the operators that haven't made this choice, right? So it's either a co-founder who basically it's one of the 7 things that's on their plate. We all know in the short-term rental business, there's a million different things that you have to do. And so oftentimes it gets overlooked, and it costs you a lot of money. So whatever you want to do, like make sure somebody's focused on your revenue management, right? Now, the biggest skill that we see that hosts are lacking is pacing. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. All right, we will explain what pacing means exactly, how you measure it, and how you then use it to make pricing decisions in your revenue management strategy. So just to show the power of this, we have a case study here of a client of ours. They started with us, and what was interesting about this client is that pacing was pretty much the only thing that we changed. They were doing a really good job on everything else. And we were kind of shocked to see that within a couple of months, we were able to increase their RevPAR by 35%. And we'll dive into exactly like how we did that later in the presentation. But I just want to kind of stress how important this stuff is, right? It's really incredible, like how much you can increase your revenue if you master this concept. And today, I'm going to show you the basics of it so that you can implement it in your business, right? So essentially, what is pacing? It's essentially you're comparing a future KPI to similar units in your market. That could be a comp set that you've created. That could be the entire market. So maybe if you have a 1-bedroom listing that you're looking at the pacing for, you might want to compare it to all the 1-bedrooms in your market, or maybe the 1-bedrooms in your neighborhood, or maybe even like a smaller comp set, right? But essentially, pacing is just about you're comparing a KPI, in this case, occupancy, which occupancy is the most important KPI to track when it comes to pacing. And you're comparing that to the market. And then you understand like, hey, am I pacing behind? Am I pacing on pace with the market, or am I pacing ahead of the market? right? That's essentially what pacing is. Now, the reason why pacing is so important is because revenue management is not, it's not hard science. We can't calculate the optimal solution, right? It's not like mathematics where 1 + 1 is 2. There's so many factors involved, there's so many uncertainties and unknowns that it's impossible to create, to calculate what the best price is. And so what we can do is we need to use information that's at our disposal. And when you calculate your pacing KPIs, that is going to be your best pricing clue. So that's the best clue that you'll have that will tell you to either increase or lower your price or keep it the same. That's why pacing is so important. So it all comes down to like understanding when guests actually are booking. And this is different for different markets, for different units, for different neighborhoods. So, it's all about the booking lead time in the end of the day. Booking lead time is simply the time between that somebody makes a booking and the check-in, right? So if I today on November 20th, if I make a booking for December 20th, the lead time for that individual booking is 30 days. Now, if you combine the lead times, then you get a booking window, right? So for example, let's say for Christmas is coming up, right? Next month is Christmas. If you look, for example, last year, if you take all the bookings in a certain market for Christmas and you add up all the lead times, then if you combine all those, that's what we call the booking window. Now, typically the booking window looks something like this, where a few months out, the first people start booking, then it slowly increases. Somewhere around 1 month or so, that's where most of the bookings will happen. And then it kind of comes down. And then a bunch of people will book even very last minute, right? Like 1 day in advance, 2 days in advance. And this is going to be very dependent on your market, right? If you're in a beach market, maybe the booking window for next year's summer has already started. Maybe people are already booking for July, right? If you're in like my downtown Miami, probably people will only book maybe 2 or 3 weeks out. So this is very, very important that you understand the booking window in your market and even for your units, because a 6-bedroom might have a very different booking window than a 1-bedroom. So another way to think about the booking window is think about like, who are these people that are booking? We like to keep it simple and kind of categorize them in 3 categories: the early bookers, the middle bookers, and the last minute bookers. The early bookers are the people that are looking for a very specific property. They are not very price sensitive. They typically are willing to pay a higher price. Usually they're families, group travel, or people booking for special occasions like college football games, or maybe like graduation, right? These are really important events for people where they're willing to spend a lot of money on that experience because it's so important for them, right? So these early bookers, typically they're less price sensitive. They're willing to pay a premium price. That's why it's really important that you participate in the early booking window. And so when the first people are starting to book, you want your properties to be properly priced so that you have a chance to get booked in that time frame. Now, most of the bookings will be in that middle part. This is what we call the middle bookers. They have a little more of a balanced mindset. They're not necessarily willing to pay like a super premium price, but they're also not looking for the cheapest last minute deal, right? So they're kind of in the middle, right? And most of the bookings happen here. Now, lastly, we have the last minute bookers. This is a category that you want to get some last minute bookings, but you don't want. This shouldn't be the meat of your bookings. This should really be the pepper on the steak, right? This should be like filling up the gaps. Now, the big mistake that we see a lot of operators make is they are overpriced early in the booking window. A lot of people have like far out premiums set up and they don't really pay attention to how they're priced 6 months from now. They usually just focus on the last minute, the next couple of weeks. And so a lot of times, these operators will fall into this last minute trap where they still need to fill like 70-80% of their occupancy last minute when everyone else is dropping their prices, and now we're competing on price, and it's going to be very difficult to get premium prices for our properties at that point. Okay, so the last minute trap is definitely not where you want to live. And so another way to think about this is if you are not leveraging the entire booking window, so if you're not getting your fair share of the bookings that are coming into the market for your properties, you can kind of compare this with, imagine there's like 3 shops in the shopping street, and they're all selling similar clothes, right? But one shop only opens at 1 p.m. The other shops open at 9 a.m., right? And there's this flow of people walking through the shopping streets. Now, the shops that are open all day are obviously going to make more revenue. And so if you are overpriced early in the booking window, you're essentially just opening your shop at noon or 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. and you only have like a few hours to sell your goods versus like the entire day. Right. So you're really limiting yourself if you're not competitively priced throughout the entire booking window. Now, I talked a little bit about this, like how do you define your benchmark? You hear people talking about market, comp set. Those are kind of interchangeable terms. It all depends on like what do you compare your properties to. Okay, but for this presentation, when we talk about the market, it could mean a comp set, it could mean the entire market or your neighborhoods, whatever you think is best to compare your units to. But here's your most important KPI to track. It's called the Market Penetration Index, MPI. All right, if you're using Price Labs, you can very easily track this KPI because it's on your multi-calendar, it's on your in your reporting section as well. If you're using Wheelhouse or Beyond or another pricing tool, then you may have to manually calculate this. We use Price Labs exclusively across our portfolios. But essentially how you calculate it is you calculate your forward occupancy divided by the market occupancy. All right. So if our occupancy for the next 90 days is 30% on our portfolio and the market is already 60% booked, then that means our MPI is going to be 0.5 or 50%, right? So then we have half the amount of occupancy that the market has, right? So that means we're pacing behind the market. So here's a screenshot from Price Labs. If you're using Price Labs, you can simply click the Add Metrics button here on the top right, and you can select an MPI. It could be either like the next 6 months or the next 4 months, the next 3 months. We always recommend track the MPI based on like how long your booking window is, right? So if people are currently booking all the way through like April, May, you might want to look at the 180-day MPI. But if you're in a market where you have a very short booking window, then you could be looking at maybe the 60-day MPI, right? It all depends on what your booking window looks like. Now on the multi-calendar here, Price Labs puts this MPI number as a number of 1.4 essentially means 140%. Essentially means we have 40% more occupancy than the market for the next 180 days. If you go to your reporting section, it's going to show up as a percentage. So it's a little bit confusing, but essentially these are the two main places that you can track your MPI inside of Price Labs. So then the next question is, now that we know, like, okay, well, how do we measure our pacing using MPI? The next question is, well, what's a good MPI? Like if my MPI is 100%, well, is that good or bad? My MPI is 50%, is that good or bad, right? Or what if it's 150%? And the answer is, it depends on what season you're going into. Because if you're going into your high season and you're expecting the market to book up close to 100%, then you can be pacing either a little bit behind or with the market and get a really good result. In some cases, you might want to pace a little bit behind the market. So you might be targeting an MPI that's a little lower than 100%. The reason though for that is that in high season, often a lot of hosts are underpriced. And so the first bookers will kind of scoop up the underpriced units. And so you don't really want to participate in that early in the booking window because you don't want to give your properties away during high season, right? So, and the other reason that you can be lagging a little bit versus the market in high season is that because the market's booking out almost completely, you can still get premium prices later in the booking window. Now, if you're going into low season, that's a completely different story, right? So if you expect the final market occupancy to be much lower, like let's say like 50%, well, you want to be pacing ahead of the market. You want to be grabbing more of your fair share of the bookings because you know that there's not going to be enough bookings for everybody to fill up. right? And so you want to be pacing ahead of the market. So this is just one guideline to remember is like the lower you expect the final market occupancy to be, the higher you want your MPI to be. A lot of the people that are on this webinar right now, you're probably going into low season, unless you're in the ski market or maybe in Phoenix or so. You're probably going to go into low season, so you probably want your MPI to be higher than 100%. The worst thing you can do is to be pacing behind the market going into low season, because there's not a lot of bookings to go around anyway. And then if you're pacing behind, it's going to be very difficult. You're going to be relying on last minute, and in last minute in the low season, it's very difficult to fill up your units. Okay, so as a general guideline, your high season strategy is when you're expecting the market to be 80 to 100% occupied, pace with the market, a little bit slower in some cases, can be fine as well, but demand is going to be very strong. You don't want to be the person that's underpricing and kind of get picked off, early in the booking window. You want to make sure your prices they're high, but they're not unreasonably high, right? So you want to be a reasonable choice. You want to be competitive, but you don't want to underprice, right? So keep that for high season. Keep your pacing, keep the MPI, track that MPI, and make sure that you're roughly pacing along with the market. If you're going into low season, it's the opposite. You want to be pacing ahead of the market. So you want to essentially offer a more competitive rate far out than your competition. Most operators price too high far out, okay? Because the idea is like, hey, we got plenty of time. We don't need to be competitive now. We're early in the booking window. Yes, but if you're going into low season, you better get those bookings early on, because otherwise, like, it's going to be really hard to maintain like a healthy occupancy. And my recommendation is, even in low season, try to maintain 60 to 70% occupancy, because when your units sit empty, you're going to lose visibility on the OTAs, and you're going to be struggling to even book for the shoulder and the high season as well. So it's better to keep momentum going during the low season. So that's why we always target a high occupancy even in the low season. Sometimes that's not possible, right? If you're in like a ski destination, some of the months there might just be like 10 to 20% occupancy, right? Or like beach markets in the winter, sometimes you see like super low occupancy where it's just impossible unless you get like snowbirds coming down, things like that. But at least like you want to aim for 60, 70% occupancy in the low season. And that's why you want to get ahead of the market. You want to be pricing competitively before other operators are starting to drop their prices. Now, the next question is, once we understand how do we measure pacing and how do we set pacing targets using that MPI, using the market penetration index, how do we now make pricing decisions based on these indicators? Well, it's pretty simple. If you're pacing behind, you want to lower prices. If you're pacing ahead, you want to raise your prices, right? If you're on track, you keep your prices the same. As a general guideline, there's a lot of nuances to it, which we'll get into some of the nuances, but this is a general idea, right? Now, what other factors should we consider? Number one is pickup. The reason we want to consider pickup, and pickup essentially means it's like how many bookings did we get in the last 7 days or the last 15 days? The reason that pickup is important is because if you're at a low MPI and your target is higher and you want to essentially like pick up more occupancy, if you're getting a lot of bookings, then you're moving in the right direction, then you don't necessarily need to lower prices, right? On the flip side, if your MPI is really high compared to where you want it to be, but you haven't gotten any bookings for a while, then you're also moving towards your target already. So then you don't necessarily have to lower or raise your prices, right? So you want to think about these two things, like where's my MPI right now? What's my target? And am I currently going in the right direction or not, right? Another thing to consider is long-term bookings. If somebody books your property for 2 months, your MPI is going to go through the roof, right? It's going to be like 300, 400, 500%. Doesn't necessarily mean that you want to raise your prices, because if it's only one person that booked your property, right? So it's only one booking decision. right? So you want to keep that in mind. If you get like 10 bookings of 2 days each, that's a much stronger signal that you're underpriced than if one person books your property for 20 nights. Also, you want to pay attention to non-pricing related issues, right? Before you drop your prices because your MPI is off target, you want to make sure, is there not a problem with distribution? Maybe there's something on your Airbnb listing that you have to optimize. There could be some other reasons why your property is not getting booked. Maybe you got like a bad review or something. So you want to just keep those factors in mind as well. And then also like new listings typically have very low MPIs, right? Just because you need a couple months for the listing to really gain some momentum. So there you want to apply slightly different rules. And also you want to keep an eye out for like if you have master listings. So if you have like a duplex and you rent out the individual units, right? You want to make sure that you take that into account when you look at your MPI, because if the master units get booked, then the individual units are also blocked. And so there's some, there's some complications with the KPIs there. So, so keep those factors in mind. Pickup, we just touched on that. Like I like to look at like the amount of bookings in the last 7 days and 15 days. So in this example, you can see that we have 2 units. They're both at an 80% MPI. So they're both slightly pacing behind. So typically we would want to lower prices a little bit to get that MPI a little higher. However, as you can see here, for the unit below, Colton 208, we got 3 bookings in the last 7 days, right? So that's a pretty good pace. So we're probably, if that continues, our MPI is gonna go up a little bit. Whereas the other property only got 1 booking. So I'd be much more inclined to lower the price on the Atlantis unit here than the Colton 208 unit. So that's how you take pickup into account. So that's where it becomes a little bit of an art rather than a science, right? Now the pickup metric, you can look at pickup in terms of revenue, RevPAR, bookings, book nights. For us, what we found the most reliable pickup KPI is bookings, right? Because again, if somebody books, like if you track, for example, nights or revenue, if somebody makes 1 big booking, that's going to really have a big impact on those KPIs, but it's really only 1 booking decision, right? And it's really like those booking decisions that are the strongest pricing clues. So that's why we like to track and focus on the number of bookings as our pickup indicator. Right, so to put this all into a plan, I know I went through a lot, and again, we record this. I'm available for questions. We'll provide you the slides, so don't worry if you're not following 100%. We'll support you if you have questions, right? But essentially, this is your revenue mastery action plan, right? And this is essentially what we do on a daily basis, on a weekly basis for all of our portfolios. Step number 1 is you look at your season, the season that you're going into. Look at like what do you expect final occupancy to be this month, next month, January, February, right? And set your MPI target for those months accordingly. So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is you track your MPI, your pickup, and then every week you review these KPIs. Every week you look at your portfolio. You see, how am I pacing for next month? How am I pacing for January? Or even how am I pacing for Christmas, right? If you're in a market where people are already booking for summer, you might want to start tracking like how you're pacing for summer, right? If the market is already like 25% occupied, you haven't gotten the 0 bookings for the summer, you're probably overpriced, right? So you want to make sure that you already start looking at that now. So that's really your action plan. When it comes to adjusting prices, there's a lot of ways that you can adjust prices. You can adjust the base price, you can put manual overrides, you can change seasonal prices. There's 100 different ways that you can change prices. But to give you some guidelines is, number 1 is don't change them every day, because then what you can get is like what we call the yo-yo effect. It's like you raise the price today and then like you get a bunch of bookings or you raise the price because you're getting a lot of bookings and then suddenly you don't get bookings and you lower it again and you raise it and you keep like lowering and raising it and then you can't really tell like what's happening. And so what we recommend is just change prices once a week, right? Obviously, like if you see a bunch of bookings come in and you think you have to make a fast decision, you can do that. But yeah, don't change the prices too often, because then it's going to be very hard to like really understand like how the changes affect the bookings. Now, the way you change prices, like I mentioned, you could do seasonal based prices. You could do manual overrides. You could change prices for 1 month, for a week, for a day. Like what, it all depends on what period you're looking at. But I would recommend make small changes. What we see a lot is our students who implement these strategies is they make too big of a change, and then you get into the yo-yo effect again, right? So make small changes, like 5 to 10% of the price amount. So if you're at like 100, right, and let's say you feel like, hey, December we're pacing a little bit behind, take $5 off, right? Or on your portfolio, take 5% off if the entire portfolio is pacing behind. You might just lower the prices by 5% for the entire month, right? But don't make huge changes, make small changes. And then also, consider all factors that we mentioned, like make sure that there's no distribution problem, or maybe there's calendar blocks that could impact your MPI, any long-term bookings as we discussed. So that's really our process that we apply. As I mentioned, like we have a little case study here. So I want to show you guys a little bit of the power of this. So we started with this company early in the year, and their pacing for the summer was way off. They were pacing way behind, and they weren't aware of it. Okay, so we came in and we immediately started adjusting prices. I know these graphs are a little bit hard to understand, but essentially what you can see here is we're comparing here June prices from 2024 to 2025 based on the number of days until check-in. And the big takeaway here is that you can see that our client in 2024 was way overpriced early in the booking window. And this is a very common mistake that we see people make, right? So you can see here the average ADR for these units, and we're only comparing same store units, right? So we're comparing the same units in 2024 to the same units in 2025. They were priced on average just over $400. And they weren't getting any bookings, and then they dropped it very drastically, right? About 3 months out, they dropped it very drastically. Now, when we came in this year, we started off with a much lower price, then we ended up getting some bookings, so we raised it a little bit, and then we slightly started lowering it again. As a result, you can see here on the occupancy pacing, the blue line is this year, the dotted line is last year again. You can see that this year we started getting bookings way earlier than last year, right? About 90 days in, we were already at like, let's say around 15% or so in occupancy, whereas last year they only had like a couple percent of bookings in the books. Now their bookings last year started coming in, around like 80 days in or something. That's after they made that drastic price decrease. Now, as you can see, even though they actually lowered the prices below where we had them, so you can see here around the 90 days mark, the prices last year were actually lower than we have it this year. But still, our occupancy was going up faster. And that's because when you get bookings early in the booking window, you give a signal, you send a signal to the OTA, especially Airbnb, like, hey, we are already getting bookings, right, for this unit. And that improves your visibility, and that gives you momentum. So then even though we had higher prices, around like the 90 to 60 days out, our prices were actually a little bit higher, as you can see here. Our booking pace was still increasing compared to last year. And so we ended up with roughly the same occupancy, right? We ended up, around like 80%. And this is like a big trap. When people see high occupancy, they think that their pricing strategy is working, right? We hear it all the time. Well, I don't think you can increase our revenue because we're 80% occupied, right? Well, but maybe you're not getting the best ADR, right? Because look at the RevPAR graph here. Our RevPAR ended up at, I think like 180 or something. And last year, their RevPAR was like below 150. And the reason for that is what you can see here. This is the actual ADR, the average ADR for these units that we were able to realize. The red line is 2025. The black line is 2024. You can see that really in June, we see a big gap, right? The ADR that we were able to capture this year was way higher than last year. And this is continuing all the way into November, December, right? And so the reason that we were able to capture a higher ADR is because we're just getting booked earlier in the booking window, right? This client of ours, like they were only really leveraging like the last part of the booking window, but they weren't aware of it because they weren't tracking their booking window. They weren't tracking their MPI. So they had no idea that the rest of the market was already getting booked while they weren't getting any bookings. So if you look at the occupancy here, you see that in June, July, and August, we still reached a higher occupancy than last year, even though our prices are way higher, right? And that's oftentimes when you hear people talking about revenue management, they say, well, you can raise your ADR, but then your occupancy goes down. Well, that's not always the case, because if you master your pacing, you can increase your ADR and you can get a higher occupancy. And just so you know, the market was not very strong this year compared to last year. I'm sure everyone's aware that this year it's not, we're not seeing like 10-20% increases over year, right? This market was pretty flat. But even though the market was flat, we were able to really increase the RevPAR by just expanding our booking window essentially. So that's the biggest takeaway is we doubled the booking window for this portfolio. And that's where the additional revenue came from. So it's pretty crazy to see that RevPAR was up 35% by just increasing our booking window from about 16 days to about 32 days. So that's how powerful this pacing game can be if you really master it. All right, I want to open it up for Q&A. I hope I didn't talk for too long, Darren. I know I promise you I'll do it within 30 minutes.
This is great.
So yeah, let's see if there's any questions.
Yeah, this is great. And we've got a bunch of questions here in the chat. I'm going to try to get through hopefully as many as we can. But I mean, man, yeah, I love going deep on data like this. So maybe first question from the audience here, Svetlana. Hi, Jasper. How do you figure out what is a good pickup number? Does it depend on seasons too?
Yes, very good question. Thank you, Svetlana. And then what's up, Svetlana? We just Svetlana and I hung out at the VRMA earlier last month. So yeah, that's a very good question, right? Because well, think about like how many bookings do you typically expect to get in a month, right? So look at your average length of stay and look at the number of bookings that you typically get. So for example, right, I know you're near Atlanta, you have very big homes. Let's say on average you get 6 bookings per month. That means that's about 1.5 bookings per week, right? So if you see that that you've got 2 bookings in the last week, or 1 or 2 bookings in the last week, that's pretty much what you expect. But if you got like more than that, if you get 3 or 4 bookings in 1 week, that means like your calendar is going to fill up faster, right? Than what you would expect. So then that probably means that your pickup is pretty strong and your MPI is going to go up. Now, if you get 0 bookings in 1 week or 0 bookings in the last 2 weeks, that means like your booking pace is a little lower than what you expect, right? So it all depends on like how many bookings do you typically expect to get in a certain period, and then compare your pickup to that number, and that tells you like, hey, am I going in the right? Is my MPI going to go up or is my MPI going to go down? Hope that makes sense. Did that make sense, Darren?
I think so. I mean, I think the
I
good
got
thing
some more.
about a webinar like this is that there's so much to unpack usually with these. So there's multiple layers of this, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was valuable. I can tell you that. So question here from John. How do you set your MPI targets for step 1 of pricing? Gets the monitor and review once they're set. So yeah, general question. How do you set your MPI targets?
Yeah. Yeah, so again, as we kind of went through in the presentation, you really want to look at what's the expected market occupancy, right? And so I'll give you an example, right? So we have a portfolio in Australia. Australia is the opposite of the States. So they have summer in December and January, right? So their high season is now coming up. Right. So if we're looking at January, which is a very popular month, like occupancy is going to be around like 90%, so very, very strong market, right? So if we're for January, like we like to be around 90% MPI. All right. So we want to actually be a little bit behind the market. And the reason for that is the occupancy is going to be so high that there's people are going to be paying premium prices even last minute. Okay. Now, if we're going into, let's say, a different portfolio, right? Michigan, right? Michigan, there's going to be very little demand, right? Northern states, there it's very cold in the winter. We want to be pace. We want our MPI to be pretty high because final occupancy in the market is going to be like 20, 25, maybe 30%. So if we pace with the market, that's where we are going to end up. We don't want to end up at 30%. We want to end up at 60, 70%. So I want to be pacing at like 200 MPI, even if my MPI is 250, 300. I don't mind because, I mean, if somebody books up the entire month of January, I'm happy. My MPI is going to be 3, 4, 500%, but I don't care because I want the bookings, you know. That's the slow season is it's not about maximizing your ADR. The slow season is about keeping the momentum going, keeping your units booked, heads and beds, driving occupancy. That's what low season is about. So it really depends on your season.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You hear everyone's, obsessed with ADR, but it's really a question of like when is the right time to think of that metric versus other metrics and kind of look at this holistically and through seasonality. So another question here from Wade in the audience. Hey Jasper, what do you anticipate will be the biggest challenge for revenue managers in 2026?
That's a very good question. Well, it's funny. I'm actually doing a podcast episode today about this topic because Key Data came out with like a really big report, and Price Labs just came out with a report as well. You can download it in your Price Labs app. But I think very similar to this year, and it's not very different from last year either. You know, the booming years of 2021, 2022, and somewhat 2023 are kind of over, right? So we're seeing like very flat year over year performance in the market. Hosts are getting a little bit more professional, so competition generally is increasing a little bit. And so I think the biggest challenge is how do you grow revenue year over year if the market is not growing year over year, right? That's the biggest challenge. And the only way to drive higher revenue in this type of market is either you invest in amenities or improve your guest experience, which I always advise people to always look at, like, how do you elevate the guest experience, right? With short-term rentals, it's all about experience. People pay for experiences. You're not renting out a space, right? You're selling an experience. So if you can enhance the guest experience, if you can make people feel special, if you can provide something unique that other competitors in your market are not able to do, then you can raise your prices. But if everything else stays equal, I would say, mastering this aspect of revenue management, mastering pacing is going to help you the most. But it's work, like you got to look at every single booking. You got to look at your pricing every single day, because otherwise you're not going to pick up on the clues and the nuances in the market. You're not going to be able to make the best pricing decisions. So yeah, I think just driving year over year revenue growth in the current market is going to be a challenge, and I don't really see that changing in 2026. Outside of maybe the World Cup, the FIFA World Cup, I'm sure you guys are aware that the FIFA World Cup is coming. That could give a big boost to revenue, especially in the cities that are hosting the games, even in the areas around there, because I think a lot of people are going to take this opportunity to travel to the States and see a game, but then also check out some other areas as well, right? So that could be the one thing that's going to boost revenue in 2026 is the FIFA World Cup.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Kind of unique things that are happening that adjust that change like what might be typical seasonality. Question here from Lee. How much do you play around with price lab settings like custom seasonality factor or far out premium? Do you think the standard far out 20% far out premium is spot on for most properties? So yeah, kind of a price lab, but I think this probably applies to other platforms too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I would say, look, Price Labs has 100,000 functionalities and adjustments that you can make, right? And I recommend, like, keep it as simple as possible. because the more you overcomplicate your setup, the harder it is to understand your pricing, right? And so I would say, focus on the basics, right? Get your pacing metrics in line. Make sure your base prices are set up correctly, and keep. There's no harm in keeping most of the settings on the default. I mean, there's a reason why Price Labs recommends certain settings like seasonality, demands, sensitivity. You can change them all, but I will always play devil's advocate with myself or challenge myself before I complicate the settings in my portfolio. I'm always like arguing against myself, like, okay, why do you want to deviate from the default? Like, I need a very strong argument, right? So sometimes I'll look at pricing and I'll see like, hey, those peak dates, Price Labs is pushing the prices way too high, right? They're like just unrealistic. All right, let's say the market is priced between $500 and $1,000 per night on a peak event, and then my price is at $3,000 and my base price is in line, right? The rest of the year, the prices look good, but then on the peak date, it looks way out of whack. I might lower my price sensitivity on demand, right? But I need a very strong argument for that. So I would say, like, yeah, don't overcomplicate it. Just definitely seasonal profiles in a lot of markets are advisable. As far as far out premiums, I'm not a big fan of just having that far out premium in there, because it used to make sense, right? 2021, 2022 used to make sense. Why? Because we don't know what's going to happen next year. And we were seeing like revenue growth year over year of like 10, 20, 30%. So like, we don't want to price too low for next year, because who knows, maybe next year people will pay 20% more, right? So it made sense a couple of years ago. Right now, outside of the World Cup dates, where you definitely want to increase your prices a lot, that default strategy of just having those far out premiums, I think it's hurting a lot of people, because people tend to be overpriced far out, and then as a result, they're not getting their fair share of the bookings early in the booking window, and then you get that problem that Sweet Digs, that client of ours, had, where they were overpriced early in the booking window, and then they were getting all their bookings in the last part of the booking window when everybody else is dropping their prices, and then you're not able to capture that ADR, right? So yeah, far out premiums, and it makes sense in certain cases, but make sure you're challenging yourself and asking yourself, like, hey, why do I want to price 20% higher 4 months out, right? Really challenge yourself and make sure whatever you do, make sure that you are priced reasonably, right? When I say reasonably, it means there's a fair chance that somebody who's going to book is going to consider your property, right?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Good. And then how do you track your MPI history? Someone was asking about that. And there's a couple like that are kind of price lab functionality, but also just like how in general. So, MPI history, and then also, does
Good question.
someone finds price labs prices too high? Can you change those lower? Do you manually do overrides?
Yeah, so I guess two questions, right? No, number one is, how do we keep track of historic MPIs? So what we have within FreeWild, we have client dashboards where every single month we have a whole range of KPIs, and one of those KPIs is MPI. So we can look back in the past and see, hey, what was our MPI, our final MPI for the month of September, or August, or October, right? So that's how we track it, and that's really important. So you can also look in Price Labs reports. If you look at the leaderboard, that's a standard report that's in every Price Labs account. If you just select dates in the past, you're going to be able to see your MPI for each of your units, and you can also copy paste that, download it into an Excel sheet, and take the average for the portfolio. So that's how you can track your historic MPI. Now, the second question was, how do we change prices, right?
And do you, is it manually overriding, they're often too high. This person says,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so now, like, the way that you change your prices is very important, because if you change your base price, for example, you're going to be changing prices for the whole year, right? So let's say you're looking at a unit now and you look at the next 3 months and you're like, oh, my MPI is like 20%. I want it to be 150. I need to lower my prices. If you change the base price, your summer prices for next year are also going to go lower. but your summer prices might be fine, right? So you gotta, that's where the art comes in a little bit. You gotta look at, I use the neighborhood graphs for the most part to get a clear understanding of like where am I priced for the next 12 months. If I see like, hey, my summer prices look pretty good, but the next 3 months I need to catch up on occupancy, I might go into a seasonal profile and just put a -10, -15, -20 on the next 3 months, or maybe like the just only the next month. I might put a manual override. It just kind of depends on the portfolio and where I think I have to make the price changes. But you want to be very intentional about it, right? So don't just jack down your base prices, because then you might be getting bookings for the summer next year at too low prices.
Perfect. Well, yeah, that kind of wraps it up here. Yeah, Jasper, thank you so much. As has been mentioned here, we'll send out the recording to everyone here. Feel free to share this, with whoever you like. Send it out, especially if they're touching on the revenue management piece of it. It's going to be very, very valuable. And then finally, yeah, Jasper, just where can people connect with you? Who should reach out?
Yeah, for sure. So we do free revenue reports. We work with clients that do at least a million in top line revenue. So if you're in that category and you're interested in working with us, you can go to freewildfoundry.com/reports, where we'll do a free analysis of your pricing strategy. We'll let you know if there's if there's potential to increase it or not. Like I said, every now and then we get a client, we get somebody who applies for our report, and then we tell them, hey, you're doing great, keep doing what you're doing. Usually we'll find some opportunities. We'll give you feedback on it, whether regardless if you want to work with us or not. We'll give you feedback on it, so you get something out of it. If you're lower than the 1 million per year, we also do have a revenue management course that you can join as well, so you can learn the revenue management side and do it yourself. And otherwise, if you have any questions, just email me at jasper@freewild.com. I'll put it in the chat here. Can people see the chat if I type here, or?
Yeah, they should make sure you send to everyone, but yeah, they should.
All right.
All right, amazing. Yeah, and then for anyone who's interested in learning more about TopKey and how we're going to help automate financial operations, if you're increasing your bookings and your revenue through all the strategies here Jasper's talking about, you need to make sure you manage that money properly, handle the accounting, handle the trust, the operational accounting, and that's where we help out. We automate all that for your bookkeeper. So. If anyone's interested in that, feel free to reach out. And yeah, until next time, Jasper, thank you so much for joining us. For everyone in the audience, thank you so much for attending.
Absolutely. I appreciate the invite, Darren, and hope everybody learned something. And yeah, if you have any questions, just email me.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everyone.